The question why publishers should think twice before outsourcing their future is now the subject. Optimization of content for platforms and relationships with them has become priority for many companies, as you better know than me. Why do digital platforms engage audiences and advertise better than products of legacy publishers? Question mark. What's the right strategy? Collaboration with platforms, competition, or maybe both? And how to maintain exclusive relationships with customers. So these are questions we are now going to hear answers from, how do I spell that? Grzegorz? No? Greg. Okay, I go for Greg. Greg Piechota, in a way, it's right? Research associate at Harvard Business School and Nieman Fellow in 2016, Poland and the US. And he has been a journalist for 20 years, and he has been editor, news editor at Gazeta Wyborcza. So, very happy to have you here.
Yep, good morning. Have you heard about the toothbrush test? There is a legend in the Silicon Valley that when Google wants to invest in a company, they do a toothbrush test. The question is whether people are going to use a product or a service as a toothbrush every day, several times a day. And obviously, news content makes a toothbrush test. It passes. And our content is driving daily news consumption, engagement on platforms all over the world. Almost 50% of US adults are using Facebook for news. And in fact, when we think about the size of these platforms like Facebook, Messenger, YouTube, they've become the new mass media. Regardless of the size of any publisher, we are no longer in mass media business. We are in niche media business. And it has profound impact on our strategy. Because platforms has aggregated so large audiences, they win the attention economy. Because they capture most of the advertising revenue. Combined, Google and Facebook share in the US digital advertising market last year went up to 70%. And in fact, when we look at the new money coming to the market, all of it is going to these two companies. In fact, they even shrunk the share of all the other publishers. So the publishers are now fighting for like 30%. And who is getting the money? When we look at the economics of digital ad ecosystem, 60% of the money goes to ad tech companies that help us to sell the ad, to present the data, to match the data with the right advertising message. In fact, publishers are getting around 1/3 of the revenue. So the big question is, okay, so if we can't really make a lot of money from digital advertising, can we get more money from these platforms? They became a duopoly on the advertising market. This is a benchmark study from the United States. This is the average monthly revenue from all the platforms for 17 top publishers like the New York Times, like BuzzFeed. What do they get? $1 million per month? And most of it is coming from YouTube. The cost of the New York Times per year is like $1 billion. This is not going to pay for content. This is not going to sustain it. So even if we imagine that we will push the platforms, and we should push them to get us better deal, but even if we make Mark Zuckerberg share all the money he gets from the advertising market, there are like 50 million publishers right now on Facebook platform. So what do we get per year? $500? Is it going to pay for our content? Is it realistic to expect that digital advertising, in the way it evolves today, is going to pay for our content? This is a big question. So who is going to pay? Before we answer this question, let me just answer another question. What paid in the past? This is the height of the newspaper and magazine model in the 80s and early 90s. So the heaviest ever newspaper published was the New York Times Sunday edition from '87. It had 1,612 pages, and it had more than 5 kilos. In fact, you know, it was the paper costed just around $1.15, so the consumers were not paying the full price. What paid the price was basically 780 display ads and almost 200 pages of classified advertising. And when we look at the biggest magazine ever published, it was a Japanese one, published in the 90s, it had almost 2,000 pages. It was a real estate magazine. So as you can imagine, most of the contents were ads. And then there was the first wave of disruption. We call it unbundling, when new digital sites could basically slice the product, like newspapers or magazines, into verticals, like news vertical, opinion vertical, maybe niche vertical, maybe brand websites, so advertisers could start their own verticals, and then marketplaces. Just unbundling news content from marketplaces basically crushed the newspaper advertising revenue all over the world, including in the States. This is what we see when Craigslist and Google entered classified ad business. Basically, the revenue was gone. It was completely disrupted. But the unbundling is still progressing. So now we are unbundling not into verticals, but we are unbundling individual articles. So you can get headlines of an article in aggregators. You get visual elements published on social platforms. We get these complements like comments and reactions go to external platforms. Recommended stories are recommended to us not by a publisher anymore, but more often by the social media. So the result is that when we look at what the biggest publishers are doing, for example, in the States, they are publishing now across up to 22 platforms. So the unbundling went to the maximum. The second wave of disruption is called disintermediation. Basically, we were the gatekeepers. If somebody wanted to reach the mass market, he needed to go through publishers. Today, this kid, Ryan, is running a business together with his parents. They are basically unpacking toys. So when we look at the top non-music video ever published on YouTube, the first 150 are music videos. And then the first one, that is a non-music video, is the video where Ryan is unpacking a big, giant surprise egg. It had 600 million views, and his channel has 6 million channel subscribers. So today, to become a publisher, you can be a guy, a very young guy with his parents, basically doing something at home. You don't need to be a publisher. And then we have the third wave of disruption that we call decoupling. How it works? Look at the traditional consumer decision-making process. So if you wanted to get news in the past, we were thinking, okay, am I going to watch TV, or is it better for me to read the paper? Then sometimes we were choosing the brand. Then we were visiting maybe a website, maybe an app. We were searching for content. Then we were finally getting the content that we wanted. And by the way, we were noticing the ads. From the perspective of the consumer, the time, effort, and cost to look for content, to find the right brand, to find the right website, to find the right story, was value eroding. Then we had the content that we wanted, it was creating value for us, and then we were forced to notice the ads. This value erosion and value creation is an important part, because when we look at the business model of a publisher was making money because people were coming to their site or an app, they were consuming content, and we could capture value by delivering the ads to the people. What the platforms are doing, they are decoupling the activity of consuming content with value eroding. Not only platforms are doing that, ad blockers are doing that. And it's not only a problem for the digital media, it's a problem for television, it's a problem for all kinds of media. People don't love to watch ads. People don't want to spend a lot of time of choosing the brand, looking for stories. If somebody can save the effort for them, if somebody can save the money, save the time, people go for it. So consumers are basically disrupting the publisher's business model. What could be the strategic response? So, several assumptions. Let's assume that digital is the future for content consumption. Let's assume that platforms are not going away, even if we cripple them, even if we ask governments for intervention, even if we get a better deal, platforms are going to still be there, and they are having much superior business model from our current business model, because they basically match consumers with content producers, and they aggregated huge audiences with their reach, with their data, with their very low cost of content. It's very hard for us, for publishers, to compete with them directly for the advertising money. And by the way, consumers are not going to start loving the display ads, because they basically feel that they are disrupting the content consumption. So what about charging other parties for content itself? This would be a strategic response, because what has been decoupled was the consumption of content from capturing value from this content. So what if we make it impossible basically to decouple it, because the content itself will be paid by somebody? Who can pay for it? I'm working now on a study, and I'm collecting these stories from around the world. So who is paying for digital content at the New York Times? Of course, they sell subscriptions, so consumers are paying. They sell so-called native advertising, or branded content as they call it. So basically, advertisers are paying for content. Then they are just acquiring different startups like Wirecutter or Shaft, and so these are retailers that are going to pay for content like reviews of technology things in case of Wirecutter, or delivery of food. People subscribe to food in America, and Shaft is one of the companies that delivers you food, like all the ingredients for a dinner every week, and basically it's all the ingredients that you get are connected with cooking recipes published in the New York Times. So basically, these retailers are paying for content. And then the New York Times is currently offering so-called donation subscriptions. So you can donate a subscription to a student. So they are collecting money like a charity. Donate a student, buy him a subscription. So what's the money opportunity here? In 2016, the New York Times made $230 million on digital-only subscriptions alone. And then they made less than $60 million on branded content. I'm estimating that they made around $10 million on affiliate marketing with Wirecutter. So Wirecutter is selling products of around $150 million, and the cut they get from Amazon and the others is around $10 million. And then I'm just calculating that they just announced that they got these donations for 1.3 million subscriptions for students. I assume that they are talking about no longer than 1 month long subscriptions, so it's around $5 million. All of these options basically is more than the New York Times is getting from Facebook. All of these options are better, businesses than trying to get money today from the biggest social platforms. So when we think about business model innovation, there is plenty of companies around us that basically changed their business model in the past decades. And it's not only driven by technology. The airline industry that I'm studying was basically losing money for the first 120 years, until somebody realized that transportation is not really going to make money anytime. So Ryanair, that was one of the innovators in this field, they started to charge for everything. You pay for your seat, you pay for a checking bag, you pay for paying by credit card, then you can buy insurance, then you can then you can rent a hotel, rent a car, whatever. All these adjacencies make Ryanair profitable. What it means that Ryanair last year made more than €1 billion of profit. At the same time, they lost more than 100 million on travel. So basically, they changed their business model. There are other examples. Supermarkets. Supermarkets are making money on so-called slot fees from producers, and on basically keeping money on their bank accounts, so they delay the payments to suppliers. This is how they really make money. They don't make money on selling goods. You've got music industry that, because of digital disruption, changed the business model, and they are making most of their money today, almost half of it, on events rather than live events, rather than selling content itself. The revenue, even from the digital content, is growing, but it's not going to sustain the whole industry. So when we think about, changing our business model, maybe we need to think about content portfolio in a ways that we need to have different content with different business models attached. And this is how we would think about future of our content. We will have, the news content, for example, that may not be profitable anytime, but it is important because it attracts users to come to visit our sites every day. At the same time, we'll have other types of content paid by different parties that will help us to finance the whole thing. And of course, when we think about what type of content are we going to have, we will optimize for different functions. We will have some content that will attract new users, new customers to our business, and we will have some other content maybe to retain customers. As you heard several times during this conference, people who are subscribers have different, usually they have different needs than people who just come as visitors to your sites. And maybe you should optimize for example, your website more for these paid subscribers rather than visitors from the social media. And then we'll have some content that we will use to upgrade. So maybe if somebody has already subscribed to the Times, maybe they should also subscribe to the food offer from the New York Times. Or maybe they will buy some other stuff through Wirecutter. And this way, basically, you will increase the revenue per user from the audience that you have. So if you do it, suddenly, the whole thing about platforms, you basically change the perspective. You are no longer competing directly with platforms. You are rather thinking about platforms as your marketing tools. So they are big fishing ponds for your customers. And this is the place where you can expand reach of your branded content campaign. You think about them as your suppliers rather than as your business partners. You are not begging them for money, but you are basically hiring them to do the job for you. Of course, social media changed a lot in the news consumption. So when we look, for example, at the consumer journey, traditional consumer journey, a lot of things have changed. So, for example, people are when they are accessing your content on Facebook, they may not even notice that this is your content. Basically, they just go directly to trial instead of it's not about brand building. They just get your content and they start reading it. They may not notice the brand. They start referring the content to others. They may react immediately, so put a like, so they evaluate the content. They may write comments, and the whole thing works differently. And even if after repeated use, you will convince them to become your subscribers, they will still use the platform. So it is possible that your subscribers still will be primarily using Facebook as an entry point to your content. So that's why it's better to think about social media more like air than just distribution channel. When I surveyed for INMA publishers around the world, what I found was that publishers are very much focused on basically getting reach on Facebook, getting engagement with their content, and getting traffic to their websites. I understand that because this is the easiest way we traditionally were making money. If we can get traffic from Facebook cheaper than we charge for advertising on our site, it makes sense. The thing is that publishers are really not very much aware of the e-commerce functions of the platforms and the big data. This is why advertisers went to these platforms. And I think that many publishers today are not using it properly. They are not knowing the opportunities that are in using of big data and e-commerce features of platforms for customer acquisition. Of course, there are many risks on platforms, not only because platforms can basically change their algorithms whenever they wish, because they can change the rules, they can change the margins, but also because there is an environment where they suppress branding and when they offer the non-differentiated layout. So, for example, you cannot really establish the difference between a story from the Washington Post that was most popular story before the American elections and the story from the Daily Press or whatever it is that was the most popular fake story from the New York Times before the American elections. Basically, both stories look the same. We need to talk with platforms about it. We need to talk how to differentiate our offering on platforms so we can segment users easier. We can attract only users that we wish to attract. But basically, maybe, just maybe a content is fine. Maybe we are too much focused on improving the content itself. Maybe it's fine. It works well for platforms. Maybe it's the business model that we rather need to fix. And maybe we should forget about chasing reach, about all these hundreds of millions of users that we cannot really monetize, and we should rather focus on the audience that we have and think how we can grow the average revenue from this audience. And maybe we should stop discussing whether platforms are your friends or enemies. We are discussing it for several years without any good outcome. Maybe we should rather change the perspective and hire them to work for us, to help us acquire new customers. If you would like to learn more about my work, I published last year 2 books with Inma about the digital content strategies and Facebook's algorithms. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this condensed run-through. Any questions from you? We have 3 minutes left. Okay, one from me. If you're talking about preserving other services, buying or functioning as a retailer or buying companies, etc., and all that happening on the platform, on your website as a publisher, does the brand itself and creating trust in the brand is still more key as a focus to be successful in that?
I think this is what we have. So we have to play with it. So people trust our brands more than they trust social media. We know it from research studies. Social media, because of the disintermediation, they allowed so many different players to come to platforms that they are harming the experience. And basically, it's not a good business for them in the long term, for sure. So we have advertisers right now in UK that are withdrawing their campaigns from Google, just because Google doesn't guarantee that they will run the ads in the right context. So of course the trust is important. Even if it's not important for the mass market consumers, for all the consumers, there will be some consumers that don't care. It is important probably for consumers that wish to pay. And it is important for the customers that we want to charge for. So obviously trust is crucial for our business.
Last question from me. How does the first speaker today, Geoffrey, fit into that? The question of algorithms and AI, etc. How this is going to change the business? Looking from the future to what you are saying, what kind of influence are you guessing is this going to bring, and what kind of change to your thoughts?
I think there are like 2 things. One thing is that when we want to target the right consumers, obviously we need to use data to do it. If we want to optimize our sites or our apps for paying subscribers, it means that we need to understand them much better than we do today. And we need to optimize the content, for example, the choice of topics, choice of stories that suits the needs of the paying customers rather than just the visitors that we just want to convert in the future. So first, we need to use data, and we need to use analytics to inform our decisions. When we think about AI, I think AI is basically about predictions. So if we can use AI to predict which customers are likely to convert into paying customers, or which subscribers are going to churn, and so on, we should use it because it will help us to focus on the right people. If somebody is going to convert, let's give them an offer they cannot refuse. If somebody is not going to convert, let's just stop catering to them. Yep. So I think this is already used by some publishers. So, for example, the Wall Street Journal has just a few months ago, they launched so-called a dynamic paywall. So basically, the paywall will adjust to a behavior of a user. So I, as a former subscriber to the Wall Street Journal, I'm never going to get anything for free from them because they already know
They
I
know
paid
that your pocket is
and
open.
that I will
Yeah.
pay in the future. So this is like with, like with airlines. Airlines use this price discrimination. If they learn that you are a frequent flyer and that you like to fly via Frankfurt, obviously the price will be higher for you.
Yes, and if you have different devices, if you have a Mac or another normal PC, it charges you differently. And if you give in your data you want to fly, they charge you more if you choose another
Because
day.
they know you are willing to pay.
You want
Yeah?
to go there? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Crucial. Thank you very much, Greg.
Thank you.